If you want to phrase your question, I don't want to put words in your mouth. If you want to say anything. If not, you don't have to.
Hey, what's up, Jay? How are you, man?
Good, man. Good, dude. How are you?
I'm chilling. Thanks for having me and being willing to host this discussion.
Sure. Thanks for bringing me into the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to give a little bit of context on why I would ask this question before I explain the question and where I was going with it, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So for anybody listening who's been following me for a while and anybody who doesn't know, so I'm technically a non-denominational Protestant, have been for 9 years now. And I have a number of Orthodox friends and Catholic friends. And over the years, as I've been speaking about the faith with them, when you speak to someone who's deep into Orthodoxy or Catholicism, you realize how much more there is to the faith than you find in Protestantism, with the sacraments and all of the teachings of both churches. Protestantism kind of leaves a lot on the table, so to speak. And so I've been curious about both, and I've been kind of moving towards both, yearning for the opportunity to get deeper into the faith. And I've spoken with both Catholics and Orthodox, and the thing about both Catholicism and Orthodoxy is that each of them individually makes specific claims to truth. And one of the reasons why I find Catholicism very interesting is because it's very Western in its thought, right? Like the Catholics have articulated every single imaginable aspect of the faith, and as someone who enjoys reason and logic and having things articulated, and as someone who has many questions about the faith, that aspect of things is appealing to me. Now, with that said, there's the question of the papacy, and this is something that I've been wrestling with, because the papacy and the supremacy of the Pope, there's a lot to make sense out of there as someone who's new to kind of both Orthodoxy and Catholicism. And Catholics are absolutely militant about protecting the Pope, protecting his authority. I mean, it's, their religion essentially revolves around that. Aside from obviously, the teachings of the Bible and so on and so forth, like the papacy is really what seems to differentiate it in large part from Orthodoxy, as far as I can tell.
No, absolutely.
In addition to, there's Orthodoxy is much more mystical than Roman Catholicism is, so on and so forth. But the papacy is this central thing. And when I was looking at the history of the Great Schism, there's so much to pull apart there. But it seems like, basically, to summarize it, it seems like the Rome was like, hey, we have supreme authority. And the East was like, no, you don't. We're not going to respect your supreme authority. This is a gross oversimplification, but it kind of seems like that's at the root. And when I read, so you shared Dictatus Papae on my thread, and I read through that, and I'm pretty blown away by this document. Speaking frankly, it just seems like the East kind of disrespected the claimed authority of Rome, and then Rome in response was like, hey, you know what, we're going to dictate that we have complete and total authority over all of Christendom, and it's going to be concentrated in the hands of the Pope, and anybody who disagrees with that is excommunicated. It kind of seems like it was a massive power grab, and I'm trying to make sense out of all of this. I don't know if the Roman Catholic claim is correct. It could be false. I don't know. I'm just trying to make sense out of all of it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing I would say is that when it comes to the schism, 1054, there's not really one thing. There's sort of an evolving and sort of piling up series of things that occur that lead to the schism at that time. There was already disagreement over the addition of the filioque to the creed. In the time of Saint Photius in the 800s, there was already discussion of this, and Photius in his letters complains that Frankish missionaries had been sent under Charlemagne into territories that were Orthodox, Bulgarian areas, and so forth, and that they were foisting this creed with the addition of the Filioque. So already there was dispute. This is why there's two different councils between the East and the West, which are called the Eastern. It's the Eastern Eighth Council and the Western Eighth Council. Pope Leo III explicitly forbade altering the creed. So even as late as that period, it was not acceptable to change the creed. But it's
when was that?
Let me see what Leo III's dates were.
That may have been Constantinople 879, Is that what you're thinking of?
Pope Leo III is he is pope from 795 to 816. Yeah, so it's even earlier. But I mean, he's famous for that position. And I think the pope after him is the one that says, no, actually, it is okay to have the addition to the creed. So basically, I mean, it's not just about the creed. It's also about other claims that are being made, which, as you correctly pointed out, by the time of Dictatus Papae, which is the Gregorian period, this is really where we start to see an alteration towards explicit temporal powers. So if I was to lay out one of the strongest arguments against this position, it's not really about whether the Pope is first among equals or first in the church, or if he signed a lot of the councils first. The Pope never called an ecumenical council. Okay, they're always called by the emperors, first of all. So that for us is a sign that they're not operating on the mindset of Vatican I. Vatican I places, this is the later council in the 1800s that places essentially all the authority in the church ultimately on the office of the Roman See. So he's declared to be, at Vatican I, infallible. He's not able to teach error, and by extension, I would argue, the assumption of Vatican I is that you can't have a pope that's a heretic. So, because it would mean that the Roman See can err and the Roman See can defect. So you have the indefectibility of the Roman See, which is taught again later on. But we already have, in the first 1,000 years, particularly the case of Honorius, the Sixth Ecumenical Council, he's condemned as a heretic. So I'm just making the point here that the church in the first 1,000 years, especially at the Sixth Ecumenical Council, certainly didn't have the Vatican I mindset because they saw fit to excommunicate a pope for actually teaching theological error. It has nothing to do with his private opinions, as Roman Catholics say, because when the council excommunicates him, they don't adjudicate between private opinions and public documents. They simply say that he taught error in one of the letters that he wrote to someone else, and he taught the monothelite error. So this idea that the Vatican I definition, which is what is the burden of proof for the Roman Catholic, you either have to say that this idea of Vatican I evolved over time, this is the idea of doctrinal development, or you argue, as Satis Cognitum of Leo XIII says, it was always the teaching of the church from the earliest days, recognized by all. So it can't be both of those. Those are mutually exclusive positions. So most Roman Catholic apologists and defenders end up having to kind of choose between these two options. And I think either one they choose is kind of devastating, because if it's a development doctrine, then we're kind of at the position of like Vatican II developments, which go in the direction of theological liberalism, even perennialism or universalism, if you look at Lumen Gentium 16 or Nostra Aetate, which are Vatican II documents, or the statement that the Jews are elder brothers in the faith, and that a lot of the statements that the Vatican has made about the Jews post-Vatican II. I mean, these are all really retroactive or revisionist positions based on the idea of evolution of doctrine. So in other words, there's nothing about evolution of doctrine that necessitates evolving, quote unquote, into a conservative doctrine. It can in fact evolve into something liberal. I would argue that the idea of doctrinal development itself is actually a kind of a liberal idea. If you look at, even though Cardinal Newman and people who proposed this idea might have been somewhat conservative, there's no reason why this necessarily would be a conservative development. But if you go with the argument of, well, it was always the teaching of the church that the Roman See was universal in its supremacy, its authority. It was always indefectible. It was always inerrant. And you notice in one of the propositions of Dictatus Papae is that the Roman See can be judged by none. I think the Roman See has never erred and never will err until the end of the world. These are ideas of indefectibility. So, but this is really impossible if an ecumenical council, particularly the Sixth Ecumenical Council, is condemning Pope Honorius for heresy. Three later councils reaffirm that excommunication of Honorius for heresy. It's not stated to be a private opinion. It's actually explicitly said to be heresy. So what we have in Dictatus Papae under this Gregorian reform period is really the Pope becoming a geopolitical power. And
that's what it seems like to me.
Yeah. And now a Roman Catholic might say, well, maybe Dictatus Papae isn't like totally dogmatic, or it wasn't really like totally authoritative. This can be something that we can throw away. The problem is that multiple Roman Catholic scholars nowadays admit that this period of the Gregorian reforms of the 11th century, this would be like Congar, Francis Dvornik, again, recognized Roman Catholic historians and scholars. This is the revolution period. It's called the Papal Revolution because the church shifts away from synodal ecumenical council approach to a monarchical papal approach, meaning now that, for example, the Pope will decide every bishop in the world. Okay, prior to this, the Pope did not determine who would be every bishop in the world. This is a total ecclesial renovation. And we know that this is the direction that the church went because even if you were to throw out Dictatus Papae, you need look no further than Unum Sanctum of Boniface VIII, which actually says not only that you have to believe in the Roman See and be in commune with it to be saved, you actually have to believe in the doctrine of the temporal supremacy of the Roman bishop to be saved. Now, where in the first 1,000 years of the church was there this idea that to be saved, you had to submit to the Pope as a geopolitical world power? Nowhere. Why was it there? It was backed up via forgeries. The donation of Constantine most famously backed up this idea of the necessity of salvation via the temporal supremacy of the Pope. Now, Vatican II, the Pope took off his triple crown. The triple crown that he used to wear signified his authority in every realm, including heaven and earth. So the taking off of the papal tiara, the triple crown, signified that at Vatican II they would no longer accept or try to promote this doctrine of temporal geopolitical supremacy. So what was necessary for salvation at the time of Boniface VIII in 1302 nowadays isn't even necessary for salvation. In fact, post-Vatican II, they actually say that countries should de-Catholicize. There should be a de-Christianization of the state post-Vatican II. This is in some of the Vatican II documents. So that's a clear change in doctrine in terms of even what's necessary for salvation. Now, there's many other things that can be said, but I think that it's not just a question of the filioque. It's actually centering on this shift away from the notion of a church that's synodal, that's conciliar, into the direction of the papal autocracy. And last thing I'll say is that the recent Vatican, this is papally approved, by the way, for you Roman Catholics who are going to hand wave this, the Alexandria document of June 2023. This is the council that discusses issues relating to the Eastern churches and to the Orthodox. This is a part 2 to the Chieti document from some years earlier. The Chieti document ends by saying that they admit that the Roman See did not have universal jurisdiction and primacy in the first 1,000 years. That's the most important element of that document. It's at the very bottom.
Sorry, Jay, can you repeat that one more time?
Sure, it's the Chieti document. Let me pull it up. It's Chieti. If you look at the very last proposition, I'll scroll down to the bottom of it. It says, Proposition 19 here, over the centuries, many appeals were made to the Bishop of Rome from the East in disciplinary matters. Attempts were made at the Council or the Synod of Sardica. This is what's called the canons of Sardica. Sometimes Roman Catholics try to argue that this teaches papal supremacy. Of course, it doesn't. If you read the actual canons, it's about it's about reestablishing trials. It's not appealing to the Roman bishop as the final word. This admits that. It says that it establishes rules for such a procedure. Sardica was received at the Council of Trullo. Trullo is a council that's accepted by the Orthodox and is accepted at the Seventh Ecumenical Council. Roman Catholics don't accept Trullo. The canons of Sardica determined that a bishop who had been condemned could appeal to Rome, and that later, if he deemed appropriate, he might order a retrial. Okay, so it's not a de facto Rome says the final word. It's just a retrial. It was to be conducted by bishops of the province and the neighboring, the bishop's own see. Appeals regarding disciplinary matters were also made to Constantinople. So you could appeal not just to Rome, but also to Constantinople. So Sardica is not a defense of Vatican I stuff like they want. Then it says, such appeals to major sees were always treated in a synodal way. Appeals to the Bishop of Rome expressed the communion of the church, but the Bishop of Rome did not exercise canonical authority over the churches of the East. So here you have a papally approved admission, Chieti document 2016, and then they reconvened this Eastern papally approved synod meeting in 2023 last year, and it's called the Alexandria document. And what's amazing about this is that the Alexandria document goes even further to admit about 90% of the criticisms that Orthodox make of the Roman Catholic Church. And I'll end with this part. That does not mean that we're moving towards reunion. What this means is that the papacy, out of geopolitical and ecumenist motivations, is admitting that many of the criticisms of the Orthodox are actually correct. It even admits that the false decretals, the false donation of Constantine, the very things I mentioned are mentioned within the third paragraph as basically forgeries that were used to prop up things like the temporal supremacy of the Pope. The Roman See can be judged by none. That's actually based on a forgery as well. That famous statement that's still, I think, in canon law in the Roman Catholic Church. Anyway, so all of these things are really admitted in the Alexandria document, and what it means is that Vatican I is not true. And if Vatican I is not true in the extent of its explicit definitions of what the universal, ancient, historic jurisdiction of the Roman See is, its indefectibility, its infallibility, its supreme teaching office, and so forth, then Roman Catholicism is false, because it's a system that's based on a consistent dogmatic statement over the centuries. So you can't have ecumenical councils, but whether it's Vatican II if you're a trad, or whether it's Vatican I if you're a Novus Ordo Catholic, you gotta submit to all of these. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And if one dogmatic pronouncement contradicts, the whole system falls apart.
So that document that you just read from, am I correct in understanding that it was conceding that the Pope did not have supremacy for a certain number of the first centuries of the first 1,000 years or whatever it was?
Yeah, the first document, the Chieti document, is admitting that there was not universal supremacy of the Roman bishop in the first millennium. And then the second document is admitting that all of this stuff was really propped up around things like forgeries, the false decretals, the donation of Constantine. There's actually many more of these, Sammachian forgeries, Galatian decretals, on and on. There's a whole bunch of these that were used for centuries to prop up, which now the Vatican admits, as do most scholars, that these are forgeries. So they're not legitimate documents. They're not the only things that were used, but they were used very heavily for many centuries to prop this up.
That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
If I could add, just of note on that topic specifically, the donation of Constantine was what was referenced by Pope Leo IX at the schism. That's literally the document in his papal bull when he excommunicates Constantinople. That's the document he references to justify it. And this is a document that is now considered a forgery. So it's not just a general attestation to these forgeries. Like, it's literally the document they used to justify the schism.
So, as I look at this from a bird's eye view, obviously the claim from both Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox is that, everyone says we are the one true church. We're the early church, right? We trace our roots back to the early church. And obviously both churches can, to some degree, make that claim. The question is whether or not, the question is which one can fully make the claim. And my personal leaning, the more and more I learn, is towards Orthodox being able to make that claim. But I obviously haven't heard the full picture from both sides yet. I mean, there's a ton to the history here.
Yeah.
And I want to hear. I'm sorry?
Oh, I just wanted to add something on that after you're finished. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the question of the papacy, again, it really seems like its primacy came into effect after, like during the 11th century and then after the 11th century. And it sounds like prior to that, Jay, from what you're describing of the history of the church, major decisions within the church were not determined by a pope, but were instead determined by synodal councils. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, the church's approach is conciliar. That's what the Vatican document is admitting. And it's basically saying, you know, when it comes to the Vatican I idea, the papacy, it's something that evolved pretty clearly. So they're going with the Cardinal Newman route of the evolution or the development of doctrine versus the idea of satis cognitum, which is Leo XIII's encyclical, that it was always there as the, you know, ecclesiological structure and model of the church to be, you know, Vatican I papal. So, so yeah, I mean,
that's what Catholics today say. They say Peter was the first pope,
right?
And there was, you know, papal succession all the way down from Peter to, you know, the current Pope Francis.
Well, let me add a little nuance here, because as Orthodox, we agree we believe in the same doctrine of apostolic succession. Where we differ is not so much whether Peter has a lineage or a succession at Rome. We think he does. But in the Orthodox mindset, if you read Irenaeus, for example, in book 4, I think, of Against Heresies, he explains that the greatness of Rome is precisely because of the presence of Peter and Paul. So it's nothing specific to Peter, it's Peter and Paul. That's the ancient tradition, even in Rome to this day. If you go to the Lateran Basilica, which is the ancient Basilica of the Roman Church when it was Orthodox, you'll see up at the very front the two sort of equal statues of Peter and Paul. They're situated very equal, so they're facing each other at the very front of the church, and I think that speaks to the ancient tradition of Rome being the see of Peter and Paul, even all the way up into Pope Saint Gregory the Great. When you read his letters, he says that the Petrine see is Rome, Antioch, and Alexandria. So even at that time, there was the idea that, you know, Peter established his succession not just at Rome but also at Antioch, and in the Orthodox Church, that's where we get the idea of Antiochian Orthodox. They derive their descent also from Peter, and so when Rome is presented with that, well, they say, well, but Peter was martyred in Rome. You see, so there's a special significance to Rome, which then, you know, somehow grants this special charism of infallibility to the descent in Rome,
or indefectibility.
Yeah, and it's not just infallibility; it's also indefectibility. All of these other, you know, attenuating doctrines as per Vatican I. But again, church history doesn't bear that out. And if you want an easier, quicker route, I would say the easiest way to see what the mindset of the church was in the first 1,000 years, to see if it was papal or if it was conciliar, is to look at what's called the canons of the councils. So each ecumenical council establishes what are called canons, which are basically just church law. And these ecumenical canons, at every single ecumenical council, do not align with the Vatican I mindset of the Pope being the supreme, universal, infallible, final word on everything doctrinal. That's why every council has canons that conflict with papal supremacy and assume conciliarism. And for example, we have canons that talk about the only thing that's needed for a bishop is to have 2 bishops and a metropolitan to ordain a bishop. There's no mention of the Roman See being necessary for the ordination of bishops throughout the world. We have statements about the limitations of jurisdiction. And there's no explications in these canons that the Roman See is exempted from the limitations of jurisdictions. These are consistent canonical statements and teachings. And so then what Rome has to do is say, well, yeah, but you know, the Pope basically just can throw out all the canons that he wants. He's above those. But the councils don't treat the Roman See as if they're not subject to the canons. The attitude of every council is that the Roman See, just like every other see, is subject to the canons. And that's why it's so great to have the Vatican now admitting this nowadays. And that's why the trads have to just say, well, I don't care what the Vatican says anymore. I'm a trad cat, and I hand wave whatever Francis and the Vatican, post-Vatican II structure does, and says, unless I like it and decide that it's trad.
So was Dictatus Papae canonized with Unum Sanctum, basically? I mean, did that become...
Well, I'm just saying that, so the point is that at that time, there's no clear, it's not like there was a clear explanation, because that Dictatus Papae was included in the Pope's register the year of 1075. So he certainly expected it to be accepted, that is Pope Gregory VII, right?
When it says it was included in the Pope's register, what does that mean exactly?
That just means that he saw it as official, his official teaching and what he expected. Now, whether he had in his mind that everybody would do that is, you could perhaps debate that. But it doesn't really matter about whether that, like, each of these propositions is, quote, dogmatic, because the main point is that what this is really about is about his temporal supremacy. And you can go to, Unum Sanctum, which explicitly does make the temporal supremacy necessary for salvation. So, in other words, Unum Sanctum really is the dogmatic statement that shows that the attitude of Dictatus Papae is expected to be accepted, even if every single proposition isn't necessarily part of Unum Sanctum. Does that make sense?
It's expected to be accepted for your salvation?
What's expected to be accepted for salvation is that you have to believe not just in the supremacy of the Roman bishop and you have to be in communion with him, you also have to believe in the temporal power of the Pope.
As dictated in Dictatus Papae.
I believe so. Now, but even if you think that it's not,
and it takes on a dogmatic character.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm saying I think Dictatus Papae.
I'm looking at this, and okay, so for those that are listening, Jay, is there any possibility you could pin your tweet where you linked Dictatus Papae on my thread to the Jumbotron? Because I think this is important for people to read, because when I read through this, my mind was pretty blown.
Right. Well, but the reason I'm talking about Unum Sanctum is that I already know all the Roman Catholic responses. I used to be Roman Catholic for many years, so they're just going to say, well, we don't have to accept that because it's not, quote, ex cathedra. Now, this is a whole other problem of epistemology, which is that there's no clear...
Wait. Before you go on that, I want to hear that, but before you go on that, we have a lot of listeners that are like hearing us talk about this, and this is like high in the sky church history for like the lay people, and they need to know what this document says. I want them to see it. Like, I'm reading it right now. Number 9 on Dictatus Papae says, the Pope alone, that of the Pope alone, all princes shall kiss the feet. Number 10 says that his name alone shall be spoken in the churches. This is the only name in the world. It is permitted to the Pope to depose emperors. Number 19 says he, the Pope, may be judged by no one. Number 22 says that the Roman Church has never erred, nor will it err to all eternity, the scripture bearing witness. 22 obviously, so is central to Catholic teaching, but 9 through 12, like this is like it's like I guess I'm asking, if you don't, is it Catholic teaching that if you don't believe in these things, according to Unum Sanctum, if you don't believe in these things, like you can't attain salvation? Is that basically
so? Here's what I'm saying. Yes, basically. So Unum Sanctum is affirming the basic principle that you have to believe in the temporal supremacy of the Pope to be saved. So it doesn't really matter about every single one of the propositions, because a Roman Catholic's going to say, well, these aren't ex cathedra, I don't have to follow these. That's the first thing they're going to say. And I can say, well, I can grant you that because it doesn't really matter, because you do have to accept Unum Sanctum as dogma. And it basically makes the point that you must believe in the temporal supremacy of the Roman bishop to be saved. And if the temporal supremacy of the Roman bishop to be saved is dogma, then all the things in Unum Sanctum follow. I mean, in Dictatus Papae follow. Then he can say, his word is law in terms of the temporal sphere. He can depose and call armies. Because you understand, after this, the Pope starts having a standing army, right?
Yeah, which, honestly, like, I don't have much of a problem with. That's pretty dope when you've got a
well, no, but it's not. Well, hold on, though. But here's the thing, though.
Except for when they sacked Constantinople.
Well, here's the thing, though. The canons of the earlier councils, like Chalcedon, for example, forbid any cleric from holding civil office. There's a clear teaching of the distinction between temporal power and spiritual power. In Orthodoxy, which is the teaching of the first 7 councils, this is the meaning of the double Byzantine, the double-headed eagle, the Byzantine eagle, right? It's 2 heads. It's not 1 head, it's 2 heads. One symbolizing the temporal power and one symbolizing the spiritual power. Now, you can't blend the two because the canons have already taught, and it had already been accepted universally, that a cleric cannot be a civil ruler and he can't be a warrior. So it's actually a violation of church law to mix these 2 realms. Now let me say also on this point, let me find the tweet, and I'll put the Titus Pape. Now, we had a lot of people who want to jump on. Is that okay with you? Do you?
Yeah, I have 2 other questions for you.
Sure, yeah, go ahead. Now, so there's a young man who says, I'm scared and running, which I've already told you, bro, we're going to go to you, dude. Like, just chill.
Yeah,
we're going to go to you.
First question. So the Great Schism, as far as I understand, the disagreement was over unleavened bread and the filioque. Is that correct?
No, those are just, again, like partial elements. Like the schism ends up being over the office of the Roman See, whether he has universal jurisdiction, whether he can unilaterally act outside of his jurisdiction to excommunicate or to control the liturgy elsewhere or whatever. Right. In other words, to change the creed. Does he have that ability? Okay, so that's part of it. There's also theological divergences that are occurring between a Latin view of how we understand the Trinity and grace versus the Orthodox conception of how we understand the Trinity and grace. That was already in the dispute going on in terms of Augustinian theology versus the theology of the Cappadocians and theosis. Okay, so that's part of it. As well as the issue of the filioque, whether there's a double procession or whether it's a single procession from the Father through the Son. All of these things are contributing. And then there's other issues that you mentioned as well, such as the bread issue, even things like communing of infants, which the Orthodox Church has maintained the ancient practice that infants receive communion. The Roman Church changed that. The Roman Church banned married priests, which it used to have. The Council of Trullo teaches that you should have married priests. So there's a whole litany of things that end up being the source of the schism.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you for that. Yeah, and the second question. So as far as I understand it, Nostra Aetate was created in order to like heal relations between the Catholics and the Jews. And I saw a document a few years ago out of the Catholic Church basically saying that the Catholic Church would not authorize officially any mission outreach to Jews to convert them to Christianity, which is like crazy to me because the Bible says that if Jews don't believe, then they will be cut off from the tree. And, you know, they already are broken off because they've rejected the Messiah. But if they don't believe, you know, they're damned. And when I look at the Catholic Church basically officially stating, no, we will not authorize official outreach to Jews to convert them to Christianity, I look at that and I'm just like, what's going on here? Like, it seems like some sort of, I don't know, I just get like weird vibes. Like it seems like a subversion from like within the church potentially. I don't know. What do you make of that?
I know that's absolutely correct. In fact, the Vatican has been putting out documents, not just Lumen Gentium and Nostra Aetate, but they've been continuing to put out documents. There was a particularly scandalous one that was approved some years back about the church's relationship to the Jews. Even so-called trad Pope Benedict, in his book, Many Religions, One Covenant, says that, Jews have a valid reading of the Old Testament, and, you know, there's not a necessity to necessarily convert our elder brothers, is, I think, something John Paul II said. So, no, this is a very notorious error, and that's precisely because Vatican II is not just about Jews. Vatican II also says that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. It says that Hindus also call upon God in love and adoration. And this is essentially, you know, perennialism. It's the idea that all the religions ultimately are sort of masks of God. And this is the basis for Francis creating the multi-faith center. Francis approved this as based on the document that he signed with the Grand Imam that we can have a Muslim, Jewish, Christian, multi-faith center in Abu Dhabi. Okay, well, that's just apostasy because we don't worship the same God. If you don't believe in the triad, then you're not worshiping the God of Abraham, because it's basic Christology, basic Orthodox theology, that Jesus is who's there with Abraham. It's not a Unitarian generic Muslim God or a Jewish God. It's Father, Son, and Spirit. It's Yahweh, his angel, and his spirit. That's the Old Testament revelation to Moses.
Remember the quote from Pascal, the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, not the God of the philosophers.
Exactly. He's actually correct.
Okay, dope. Yeah, thanks for answering that.
Hey,
do you think that they just got it wrong? One last thing. Do you think that they just got it wrong, Jay, or do you think that it was like intentionally subversive? Were there other elements that were, interested in pushing this stuff? Like,
there's actually a long history of, there's geopolitical powers that play into ecumenism. There's even Roman Catholic authors that have written books. David Wimhoff has a great book. He's a Catholic lawyer called John Courtney Murray, Time Life Magazine, The American Proposition, which is about the influence of America, its deep state, on Vatican II, and the doctrinal warfare program headed up by C.D. Jackson, a famous Roman Catholic book. He's been interviewed on countless Roman Catholic podcasts, so this is not some Orthodox conspiracy person. This is there is a geopolitical power element to ecumenism, but I think that really it's also an outworking of a long train of theological mistakes. So the idea of absolute divine simplicity, which is the Augustinian presupposition for how we go about understanding the Trinity. That really leads to a different model of the Trinity that's adopted in the Latin West in the Middle Ages. And it's not the model of the triad that's very normative and universal in the East, which is the Cappadocian teaching at the Second Ecumenical Council. So basically, if you read Photius, we would say that St. Photius and Mystagogy, the Holy Spirit, the divergence is really about the triad, and that's what conditions the ecclesiological papal divergence. And if I mentioned that Sherrard book, Church, Papacy, Schism, he actually makes the argument that the papal thing is actually an outworking of the theological mistakes.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Have you produced content on Operation Gladio?
Oh yeah. I've got probably 5, 6, 7 podcasts on that.
Legit. Yeah, I figured you probably did. Sweet. Yeah, thanks for answering my questions, Father. Sorry for interrupting you a few times.
Hey, no problem. I wanted to let you get your questions, and they were excellent questions. And I'm actually just really impressed at the right kind of questions you're asking at the level that you are. So keep up the great work. I mean, you're miles ahead of where I was.
Appreciate that, man. Yeah, honestly, I mean, when I speak to people that are educated on all of this, I feel extremely retarded. So I appreciate the vote of encouragement.
Dude, if I could on that topic, dude, it's not as complicated as people make it out to be. Even the schism itself, just from a common sense standpoint, 4 of the 5 patriarchs were on the Eastern Orthodox side. And it was only the one patriarch, the Pope, that was on the Western side.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that.
The church, in the first millennium, the church was built on the 5 patriarchs, one of which was Rome. And even in the Roman Catholic Ecumenical Council, 869, they admit that the heads, plural, of the church are the 5 patriarchs. And 4 of those 5 simultaneously were on the side of the Eastern Orthodox at the schism. Rome was alone. So it's not an insignificant detail, and it's kind of like a common sense detail that a lot of people kind of overlook.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I wanted to make. So one thing that both Jay and I have noticed, and it's just a kind of common problem that any of us could be infected with, is that we take our own paradigm and then you read that in to everything else. And so with the Roman Catholics, they have a very centralized, all the power centralized in one office. They don't have this kind of concept of decentralization, what we call in Orthodoxy, autocephaly, and synodality. And this kind of caused some problems for them kind of thinking through these issues. And let's go to what Luigi was actually saying about the split in 1054. They tend to conceive of it as, and frame the issue as, look, it's this one church against this other church. like two people, and then it confuses people inquiring into it. Well, which one's right? They're both saying they're right. But as Luigi correctly pointed out, this is because they fail to understand the kind of notion of decentralization and autocephaly. Here you have five patriarchal sees, and when they operate jurisdictionally, they're independent. So it means a lot that, well, wait, it's not one person against one person or one institution against another institution, and who's right. You have four of those people who are all, jurisdictions and sees who are independent, right? They're not under one another. They're autonomous entities.
Let me add to real quick that, and a lot of Roman Catholics don't even know this. They think that Orthodoxy just made up autocephalous churches. It's actually the Council of Ephesus that is the first statement in 431 of autocephaly granted to the Church of Cyprus. So Ephesus ratifies the notion of Cyprus being autocephalous. So it's actually out of the ecumenical councils and not something that Orthodoxy invented on their own. And Pentarchy as well comes out of the canonical structure of the ecumenical councils, not something Orthodoxy invented.
Yeah, so really you have a 4 against 1. If I could give an analogy, imagine you had like 5 friends growing up, and they're telling a story about, one of the friends tells a story about what happened growing up, and the other friend says, well, wait a minute, that's not true, that didn't happen. Oh yeah, no, that's the way it happened. So it's a he said, she said sort of thing. And then what you get is, oh wait, you get the other 3 friends come in and say, no, that's not how it happened. In fact, you're relying on a document that's a forgery to perpetuate your lie. That's more kind of an analogy of what's going on. It's that you've got 4 friends that are saying that's not how the story went at all. That's not correct. In fact, you're using a forged false document to even argue that. I think that's a good analogy and a good way to kind of think about it. All of which the 4 friends haven't been talking and been separated, so they haven't conspired against. It's just they were accounted their history together, and they found that you have 4 against 1. I think that would be a strong case that you would be, at the very least, suspicious of the one friend, i.e. Rome, and what their claims are.
Let me add Evan, he's really eager to argue the Roman Catholic sedevacantist position.
Is the timeshare presentation over?
Yeah, it's really funny. What's up? What's your argument?
Yeah, you like that? So, first, Jay, I just want to let everybody know that Jay has rejected.
Here he's going to go. He's going to go for
personal
personal
you're
stuff.
Running, dude. You're running.
Yeah, you're going to go personal stuff and then say I'm running. Do you have an argument?
Hey, Evan, do you have any? Hey, Jay, you're going to let me speak?
Do you have an actual argument?
Stop talking. I just waited. You're going to stop.
Evan,
Jay,
I'm the moderator. You have to adjust your attitude.
Nah, you guys are going to stop talking.
Do you have anything to say in
Yeah, you're going to let me speak a sentence. I just waited.
Okay, but it's not about me, so you're going to make an argument or not?
Oh, I'm going to make an argument. I'll let everybody know that you refuse to debate the Diamond Brothers and you're running.
Because I think they're a crazy cult, and that's not an argument.
No, it's because you know you're going to lose. So I just wanted to get that on the table.
So where's your argument?
Hold on, Jay.
So he doesn't have an argument.
I'm letting everybody know that you refuse to debate the top.
Yeah, I don't debate crazy cults, correct? Because there's no point in it.
Amen.
Nobody takes Ted seriously, bro.
So he waited all that time to say that he didn't have an actual argument. So now,
can you pick up on the energy? By the way, I just want to let the audience kind of know.
Yeah, it's just anger at me, right? So it's like
anger, and it's
yeah, it's classic Ted behavior.
Yeah, just take it easy. Come in and be respectful. That's all we ask.
Yeah, I've got about 15 minutes. I'm curious if there's anybody in your audience who's Roman Catholic who wants to make a counter argument in favor of the Pope's authority being legitimate.
All right, so if you've got Roman Catholic arguments, you guys want to bring it up. I do see a lot of people in the queue, as the Brits say. Feel free to request to speak. Raise your hand, because I see a lot of people, so I don't know who is and isn't Roman Catholic. So just sort of do the raise your hand thing?
While we're waiting, I just want to point out, Sovereign, as you get into this kind of like these discussions, one of the common arguments that Jay pointed out is the development of the papacy argument. And it's actually self-refuting because Pastor Eternos in Vatican I specifically says that it's been known since the beginning of the Christian religion.
Yeah. Like
in the same paragraph where it's talking about the infallibility of the Pope. So it's self-refuting to say it developed.
Says what has been known since the beginning.
The infallibility of the Pope. If you read the paragraph,
Satis Cognitum says it too. They both do. Yeah.
Yeah. So like Vatican I itself like refutes itself if you argue it developed, because it specifically says it's been known since the beginning of the Christian religion.
What do they base that on? That it's been known since the beginning of the Christian religion?
They're going to go to
quote
Vatican
mine.
Is it the verses in Matthew, or is it?
Yes, Vatican I itself is going to reference Matthew 16. That's exactly what it references to justify it. And ironically, it says it's because the keys were given to Peter. But if you go to Lateran 4, which is also ecumenical for Roman Catholics, it specifically says the keys were given to all the apostles and all their successors. So that's a contradiction between two ecumenical councils.
Yeah, and they also will rely on a lot of sort of quote mines where it's like things taken out of context, things that don't have any context, and then when you go and learn what the context is, it's like, and that doesn't actually teach papal infallibility. So Rome has spoken, cases closed, this kind of stuff, and then you go see the context, and it's nothing to do with what they think it says.